And what I'm going to do, so we're continuing the arc of our story here. So we just talked about the importance of measures. We talked about how we sort of address, in fact, let's go back to the start. We started our day with the need to engage our regulatory colleagues as partners. Then we thought about the need to not forget and to embrace our clinical colleagues as the sort of end drivers of these tools in practice, and also as collaborators and co-creators of these measures. We also then thought about starting with the measure, not starting about the gadget, not starting with the widget, not starting with sort of the shiny object. And, the next question really has to be, and I love the title that this group put together, that's great, but if you're working in medical product development, I think there's a bit of a war on between our clinical colleagues this morning telling us it's a super conservative area. It's very much the same in pharma. How the heck do we make this work in our clinical trials? And I'm going to stop sharing for a second before I invite my colleagues properly up to the stage and let Jean just do a quick walkthrough of the extraordinary resources that this group put together. This group did not mess around. This is a big question. It's a question anyone working in medical product development is probably getting almost daily right now. What they put together was a list of 24 frequently asked questions that all point at how the heck do I get this in my trial? They laid it out over the timeline. In what order should I be asking these questions? They also said who needs to be at the table in order to correctly answer these questions. And you can see that through the color coding that's here. And then for every single one of these questions, there is a whole mini dossier of resources for you to take to your teams, for you to partner with. There is likely a worksheet, a decision tool, a discussion document, a timeline map. There is likely a micro dossier of a small handful of slides that can address your question. There's also probably a link to some published research. There's probably a link to some regulatory guidance. There's probably a link to a few examples. This team, you guys were absolutely fantastic. Every single team was audacious in their goals. But what you put together, building on the resources already in the playbook to offer those most comprehensive questions, was absolutely extraordinary. So I'm going to ask Jean to pop the link into the chat so that everyone can have access to this sort of wealth of resources that you all created. And we'll dive in and we'll talk a little bit about how we hope that all of these things will go ahead and impact the field. And so, Jess, let me bring you up first, and I'd like to go to you first if I can. So first of all, Jessica, it was great to work with you. And, one of the questions that I think is posed most often is, what operational considerations do I need to keep in mind during technology selection? We can talk about this sort of order, measure, tech, ops, but we can't pass them out perfectly. You put together a terrific sort of deployment worksheet, working with Matt on this. Tell us about tell us about your background, tell us about Winterlight, and then tell us a little bit about how we can tackle this hairy question.
Sure, thanks, Jen. So I'm Jessica Robin. I'm the Director of Clinical Research at Winterlight Labs. We're a technology startup developing tools to record and analyze speech patterns in the context of clinical research and clinical trials. And so one of the things that we hear a lot from our partners is people are really excited about speech and voice. They think this is an untapped area. We don't have great clinical measures right now, and it's really well suited to getting more data more frequently at home that's relevant to patients and so on. But I think all those features that make it new and exciting also make a whole bunch of uncharted territory in terms of how do we do this? How do we actually collect these data? How do we set up our trials? All the way down to device management. Who's going to train the raters if there are raters? If there aren't raters, how do we train the participants, et cetera, et cetera. So the idea behind this worksheet was to really break down sort of all those steps, all those questions, help demystify the process of working with new measures and think through the steps of it while planning a trial so that those questions can get solved and it can be more straightforward to integrate new measures into research.
Fantastic. And Jessica, it was, I think it was particularly powerful that you were able to have this sort of truly novel approach to capturing data to really pressure test these resources and make sure they work across all of the different ways in which we can be sort of deploying these digital measures in a trial. We're going to go through a greatest hits list of questions and get all of you to talk about these a little. And Jiat, I'm going to come to you next if I can. I would like you to share, if you're comfortable, how often you hear the question, is this endpoint suitable for label inclusion? So this is a question we tackle in the playbook. Tell us about how you experience this question in your daily work and what we now have on the table to help folks with this.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Jia Poon. I'm a patient-focused outcomes measurement scientist at Lilly. And to answer Jen's question, how often do I get asked, is this endpoint suitable for label inclusion? With regards to digital health, digital sensor-related endpoints, not as often as, surprisingly, than say for a patient-reported outcome measure, for example. However, I do have to thank my digital health colleagues because they probably get the bulk of that question. Having said that, I do get asked quite a bit, and I think people always think that the people asking these questions are probably the people developing the clinical trials, but really the people that I get this question from, or we get this question from, really run the entire spectrum of the development team. We've got regulatory coming to us asking this question, early phase teams as they're considering what they need to include in, say, the first in human trials or phase 2 trials. And then the phase 3 clinical development team, we've got the medical team obviously asking that question. People responsible for building the trial design, leadership, obviously, and then of course our stats colleagues and all the other operational colleagues do ask that question quite a bit too, because it does touch on every aspect of the entire clinical trial's function and success. And then of course, beyond the clinical trial development team, the commercial team is also interested because at the end of the day, they're the ones who have to go out and sell that product to our customers. And so I think a lot of the hesitation and a lot of the wariness behind including and asking such questions is because we have very little experience, not just within the company, but I think externally too, of there being regulatory precedents, for example, specifically within maybe our therapeutic areas that we develop drugs for as well. And so there's always that hesitation because development of a molecule is such a high stakes game. And also add to that the lack of familiarity with what the process is, how to implement it, how to even go about selecting an endpoint or selecting a measure or a tool that will help you accurately, will help you answer the questions that, address the endpoint. And so there are a lot of layers of questions, and it all stems down to because the lack of familiarity. And I think this playbook, the dossier that we've put together, will definitely help teams, think through each step in the process, and for every stakeholder involved in the entire process. Okay, we've got this, what comes next? Or we've got that, what needs to come before that or after that? And how, like to answer the session, to echo the session title, how the heck do we implement this in our trials?
That's exactly right. And actually, Jiat, what you've really highlighted, I think, is so important, and why I love the way that you guys drove us to put together the landscape at the top. It's not just what are the right questions, but who needs to be present to answer them correctly. And it goes all the way back to what Amy was saying around we need this, lingua franca. We need this sort of shared sort of unifying language, and we need this shared unifying vision of sort of what good looks like and how we work through this together. And that's what you guys tackled sort of in this area. Jay, I'd like to come to you next if we can. One of the things that we talked about a lot was the necessity to have the right data infrastructure to ensure success. We have a variety of different resources on that in this particular dossier. Tell us though, why is that important?
Sure. Yeah. Hi, everyone. And thanks for the question, Jen. First, an introduction. My name is Jie Ren. I'm an associate principal scientist at Merck and in the Global Digital Analytics and Technologies group. My role includes the development of novel digital biomarkers, and I also work alongside the clinical trial teams to drive the adoption of these technologies into our trials. And to answer your question, Jen, the challenge here is that remote monitoring technologies bring in very, very different data types, as well as also decision-making frameworks that are very different from what we are used to handle. And beyond the derived endpoints, what we see is that there are also large volumes of lower level sensor outputs that is collected and transferred. The trial planning team often need to think about how each piece of data get moved around in the trial, where they are transferred among sensors, hubs, apps, dashboards, data sets, databases. When will these transfers happen? How can we ensure security, privacy, and GCP components are all in place throughout this process? And also, how can different data streams be aggregated together, right? And how will they be then triaged to inform in-study decision-making as well as outcome analysis? It sounds like a really overwhelming task, and obviously it needs to be hugely collaborative. So the question is, where do we start, right? And not to pile onto that, but we all know that digital technologies are evolving incredibly fast, with algorithms and biomarkers continue to be developed as we go. In some cases, we want our data infrastructure to be flexible enough and be able to adapt to these emerging and future algorithms, but we also need to do that in a secure and compliant manner, right? And I think all of these are new areas and can be overwhelming for clinical teams. The microdex that was developed really aimed to help with this process. It provides great considerations as we go about designing fit-for-purpose data flow architectures for our own trials. I really like the word demystifying that Jessica used, and I think we're doing exactly that, right? And you know, I like to say that it has been such a fantastic experience being part of this tour and developing these materials that can really help move the field of trial adoption forward. It has been a tremendous resource, and you know, we're really excited to share with everybody.
Fantastic. Jie, you gave that really good voice. And one of the things, you know, now we're in the thick of it, you know, as I listen to all of you as experts, I think about what we heard from our measurement colleagues, and now we're learning from you as sort of ops experts here is, you know, there aren't simple fixes, there aren't silver bullets, but that's why what we've served up here, I'm so proud of, because they're these sort of action-oriented resources. Matt, I want to come to you next if we can. And you know what, from the very start, David mentioned this when we started the executive panel, it's been a feature through the day. You know, we're talking dollars and we're talking timelines, right? When we think about sort of degrees of freedom to get this work done. Timelines obviously top priority, getting that right. And unfortunately, what we've seen a lot of, and we'll get to this later when we get into our sort of use case from the pre-mortem towards the end of the day is, you know, there are decisions made early on that to sort of prioritize timeline, not do the new steps that digital requires. And that leads to some sort of downstream challenges. Let's call them challenges, shall we? One of the resources we have, you know, we talk about getting timelines right, is mapping out sort of the impact of using these tools onto timelines. Talk to us about what you've seen. Talk to us about the implications of getting this right and what we've developed for folks.
Sure. So hi, everyone. Matt Biggs. I'm the Vice President of Applied Science at Actigraph. Started here around 11 years ago, mainly working with the scientific research community and different, you know, NIH, FDA, CDC for objective measurements. You know, with regards to this question, I've seen it during our first few projects in clinical trials. It was oftentimes, hey, I'm starting a project in 6 weeks, and I have it in the budget, right? Well, that's great. I'm glad you have it in the budget, but it oftentimes leads to a lot of pain points, site burden. You know, the sites weren't accurately trained. The translations for the manuals didn't happen because we were on such tight timelines. Even the deployment schedule for the participants, things like skin irritation, the disease symptoms, all these need to be taken in effect. And that means that we need to address these at an operational level far prior to protocol synopsis. While you will find some vendors that are extremely flexible, and that's great, but we should make a proactive approach of collaborating very early on, like during protocol development, allowing it to be collaborative between the different tech vendors, the CROs, the sponsors, and design the trial for success in the end.
Matt, I really like how you're able to draw on some examples there and how you're able to talk about the importance of it. And I think we learn a couple of things from this. We learn not only the need to do this deliberately and completely to make sure that, you know, these teams are positioned for success, but also we've talked a lot about the need to collaborate, the need to share best practice. Starting from scratch, you also mentioned scratch as a measure, so forgive me, starting from scratch every single time and not sharing that knowledge could potentially make this an insurmountable burden. When we have done that work in a certain context with a certain technology in a certain population, the need to share those learnings so that every time we go back, we're able to start a few steps ahead. That I think is the secret sauce to move us forward. And I think, you know, what I hope is not only will folks be able to access these sort of open access resources to do the work, but will, in the same way that you guys all came to the table to share your expertise, we'll start sharing that knowledge. I want to keep working through some of our questions that we cover in this, because I'm sure so many people in the audience are sort of nodding their heads and saying, yep, this is stuff we bump up against. Santosh, you picked a question that I probably get about 5 or 6 times a day here at Dime. Is it validated? Tell us a little bit about the manifestation of this question and tell folks about the tool that we have on deck to help them negotiate this.
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. I'm Santosh. I'm joining from Mumbai. I have a background in pharma R&D. I have worked leading global clinical projects and teams at Novartis, Johnson & Johnson, and Pfizer. And since last few years, I'm working as a consultant on digital health innovation projects. And yes, Jen, coming to your question, you're absolutely right. We get a lot of these questions. Folks are confused about what is validation, how do we validate, what do we validate, and things like that. We actually have a very good resource, our own paper from Dime on verification validations that's called V3. So we thought that why not turn this around and make it into a fun tool. So take people through the different steps in validation, including the technical verification that is involved, the analytic validation that is involved, and then lead to the clinical validation. We had a lot of fun developing this tool. I'm sure this is going to be one of the best that people will come back to through Playbook. So I request everyone to go through it and enjoy working through the validation steps.
It is a decision tool that is out there to help you not only work through the big question of is it validated, which is a complex question, but also puts at your fingertips the resources you need to work through each of those steps. And Santosh, I was really delighted you had such an innovative way to try and tackle that question. And I hope that folks find a lot of value in using it. I want to come to you next, Susie, and talk a little bit about, you know, silos has been a feature of the day, right? Siloed teams, siloed knowledge. There was a really terrific question that you guys sort of encouraged us to answer together. How do I pick the right connected sensor that works not only for the needs of my patient, but also for the needs of the trial? Really sort of bringing these two things together and insisting that we don't keep those either as, you know, we're only answering one of those questions. Unfortunately, when that happens, unfortunately, patients often go to one side, but also making sure we're doing it in the same breath and not passing it out.
Yes, thanks, Jennifer. My name is Susie Foos. I'm on the decentralized clinical trials team at Covance by Labcorp, looking at innovation enablement. I think I'm going to adopt the byline of my job as how the heck do we do this? So a lot of my job is looking at how do we take these innovations and really make them a reality. So Jen, I think you're totally right. Picking the right tech partner is really complex. It's not just a looking at the order. I think we talk a lot about order. It's not just, oh, I have this technology, it's that shiny object, let's go with it and figure it out. It's also not about, okay, I have a measurement, I have this meaningful aspect of health, I found a device or a sensor that can measure it, I'm done. It's much more complex than that, and we need to take a thorough and holistic assessment when you assess all these questions, and there's going to be different subject matter experts involved in each of those questions, making the determination, does this sensor fit what I need? It's also important that you might not find the best, like something that answers all the questions as yes. So really being able to, okay, if this is not a true yes, for this particular question, what is the risk of it being a no, and what mitigations could I take to really find the best technology? And you might have to search many different technologies or sensors to find the one that best fits your criteria. And that can be very overwhelming. Project teams have so much else that they're looking at. This is just one aspect of their trial, right? They're looking at study startup, countries, timelines, regulatory submissions, getting sites on board. So we've developed a checklist to hopefully navigate some of the questions that you need to ask, references to the playbook, and also other collateral that we've created on this tour. I find that this checklist is really that bridge between finding tech that has the right measurement and it meets B3 and it fits into your technical, security, data, operational needs. And most importantly, it fits the needs of the patient. And I think that all these criteria really need to be evaluated when you're picking the right sensor.
Susie, you articulated that really well. And I think that was why it was so important that beyond, here's a 407 slide deck, we actually pulled this out, and the work that you guys did to supplement, not only by creating microdecks, but creating action-oriented resources. The work you did has been absolutely phenomenal. And I want to pull on a thread here for a second and maybe toss it back to you for a second here, Matt. Susie mentioned something that is a real sort of aha moment for many folks as a result of the playbook, the need to not just pick the right technology, but also the right vendor partner. And when you have that, you have to be able to first define what the right vendor partner looks like, and then really sort of collaborate with them to make sure that there's a clear understanding of who's responsible for what. Tell us from your vantage point, maybe through successful experiences or otherwise, why that's so critical to get right, not just the tech, but the right vendor partner.
Sure, absolutely. So oftentimes what you'll see are, we're collaborating with multiple vendors for a single project. And these vendors aren't always billion-dollar companies. They're startups, right? They're small to medium-sized businesses. Some of them have great technology, great algorithms, have experience on a population or disease. Maybe they don't have a 24-hour support line though, right? So that's a negative. But if you are collaborating early on, it's potential that maybe the CRO has a 24-hour support line, and FAQs can be sent, from the small to medium-sized tech companies. So you really approach it as a team setting. No competition needed, right? This is what I'm good at. Let me do this. And when I do fall short, maybe someone else can pick up, the slack. And it's that full collaboration. It might be a technology wearable, a spirometer, your EDC system, the CRO. But if we see a gap, it's not a game stopper. It's just one of who has the bandwidth to rise to the occasion per project.
Matt, I really appreciate that. And I think, it just underscores, there are going to be a few fundamental things that folks are going to take away from our work on the playbook and sort of best practices going forward, right? We've created all this collateral for folks. Hopefully it's very useful. I expect it will be. I think it's going to move the needle, but it will only work if we do things like the collaboration that you mentioned. Other colleagues on the line have talked about internal collaboration, making sure the right folks from your internal organization are at the table, and then your external partners. And so sort of following that thread a little bit, Jen, I want to come to you. I've been saying it since before tech was even a thing, engage patients, engage them throughout. And now that tech is very much here and here to stay, it's not a single touch point. It's, talk to patients about whether you're identifying the right measure, really engage them in the measure development process, think about the technology and also the deployment bit, right? All of that is key. You, Savvy, so thank you, donated some phenomenal storytelling around, the power of doing this. That's included in the executive dossier. Help us think through today around how we actually do that in practice. We've made the case for it. It's in the executive dossier. How do we actually do that?
Yeah, well, first of all, congratulations for all this amazing work. It's truly remarkable to see it all come together. So I'm Jen Horonjeff. I'm the founder and CEO of Savvy Cooperative. Savvy is a patient-owned co-op that helps to connect companies and innovators directly with patients and caregivers so that they can do this kind of work. And I care so much about this because I am a patient first and foremost. I was diagnosed with juvenile idiopathic arthritis, among many other autoimmune conditions when I was an infant, before becoming an academic researcher working in clinical trial outcome measure sets. And maybe to exemplify this, I want to share a quick story about a study where they were working in RA and they were using an activity tracker, and the hypothesis being that as their RA was under more control, they would see the activity and step count go up. And sure enough, they found that one subject that was the opposite. Their activity level was going down as pain levels were going down as well. And so they actually called up this participant to say, like, is everything working? Are you not wearing the tracker? And they said, no, I feel amazing, but I'm an author. And so now that I feel well enough, I can actually sit down and write. And so here it just goes to show that this may not actually be the correct endpoint for every person. And we need to maybe do some work prior to, deploying these things to understand, are we taking a holistic approach to understand the impact of our therapeutic on somebody as their, holistic self. And so I think that what I want people to understand is that we need to do the work with patients early to understand what this is. So we don't have to make these phone calls. We don't have to make amendments mid-trial, that we can actually do that work. And it's also really important to think about from a diversity and inclusion lens as well, to make sure that we're not just guessing kind of in our ivory towers what makes sense for us and our peers, but also thinking really thoughtfully about what other populations may need, their comfort level being tracked to begin with, and how they understand what data is being collected, for what purpose, who has access to it, what happens after a trial? Could this get, then distributed to another company and bought and sold? And so just all of these different things that we can really be more thoughtful about an informed consent process if we do the work to work with the communities we're trying to serve before deployment. So that's really the message that I want people to leave with, is that patients are your partners in developing these trials for success. And so if we do the work, we're going to see the benefits.
Jen, I love how you've teed that up. The story is really powerful. And I think, let's follow the bouncing ball a little bit here. If we don't do it, just as you've said, either we're going to get to a point where there's an awful lot of expensive data that we simply can't use, or there's not even a lot of data and it was very expensive. So, the ethically correct thing to do is to focus on the patient. That's why we're all here. That's why we're all in this industry. And I also love that you gave such powerful voice to the, fully representing all of the different patients and the people that, again, we are here to serve through this work. It's inadequate to sort of cherry pick. A convenient sample simply won't do. Really, really powerful call to action. Team, this was a fantastic body of work. Before I thank you and we close these things out, I would like to have a little bit of fun for this next poll. We're going to put a poll up here. We picked, of the 24 questions that all have these sort of robust sort of dossiers to support you and your teams answering them, we picked a few from the greatest hits. Please let us know which is the first FAQ that you are going to be diving into at the end of today's session, which is the first one you want to use with your colleagues and with your teams. And I'll give you just a second to read through and select. I get the fun of watching these results come in live. Let me end this and share. So first of all, Santosh, ding, ding, ding. Is this clinical measure validated? Top question here. But also what's quite, I think, compelling is, there are questions across the board. And that's why I am so incredibly proud, guys, of the work that you put together here. I also want to recognize our colleagues, Katy Jones and Matt Pipke, who weren't able to join for this session today. They were all, and Andy Carvos was part of this work as well, making sure that we recognize everyone on this team. There are 24 frequently asked questions that are asked and answered with who needs to be at the table, action-oriented resources, and the evidence that will support this decision-making. This is an extraordinary contribution to the field team. Thank you so much for the work that you've done here. It was an absolute pleasure, and I'm thrilled that this is now live and in the hands of the folks who need it. So thank you so much. Thanks, Jia. And folks may be delighted to hear that we're at the point where we're going to take another short break. So it will just be a 10-minute break. We have so much material to share, but please take just a couple of minutes and join us again, top of the hour, or Santosh for you, bottom of the hour, and we will dive back into our next session. Thanks so much, everyone.